afternoon, and welcome once again to Parsha and the CBD. We are going to discuss a very interesting idea, and of course, we're going to begin with a joke. So, Abler was serving as a policeman, and he was in traffic control, parked on the side of the road, and he sees the most fanciest Lamborghini fly past. So, Abel, of course, turns the siren and chases it down. Finally, catches up to the gentleman driving this fast car and speeding. And doesn't winds out the window. And he says to him, "Sir, can I see your license?" And this gentleman turns to him and he says, "Do you know who I am? Do you know who I am?" And Abel says to him, "No, I don't know who you are." "You don't know who I am? How dare you do this? You don't know who I am." So Abel says, "Sir, I think I understand the situation." Abel reaches for his radio and he says, "We need an ambulance. We need to take a gentleman to the mental hospital. He has no clue who he is." Now, of course, we have this question: who are we? What are we? Now, there's a very famous story about a very famous person called Alfred Nobel, Dr. Alfred Nobel. Dr. Alfred Nobel was a scientist that developed what we know today as dynamite. And of course, back in the day, it was a very, very important element to have, because it caused that mining would go a lot quicker. Still today, they use it in mining. And of course, that's where we have a few recent sad stories about particular places which were destroyed because of the dynamite. But nonetheless, it was something which Dr. Nobel thought it would help society. And of course, he made lots of money from his invention, from his development. Now, many years after making lots of money, Alfred's brother passed away. And for some reason, the newspaper got mixed up and they thought that it was Dr. Alfred that had passed away. So he saw in the newspaper the title which they wrote. And it was Dr. Alfred Nobel, the Merchant of Death. And they wrote about him that because of this man's invention, he made money off killing people. And why? Because not only was it used for productive things, but also was used in war to be able to kill people, to be able to destroy people. And Dr. Alfred, he saw this and he thought, "Oi, Gewalt, is this how I'm going to be remembered to the world? Is this how people are going to look at me after I pass on? This is the legacy that I'm going to leave, the Merchant of Death." So he decided that he shall do something else. So he took a very large chunk of his money and he decided to create what we know today as the Nobel Prizes. And what is that? In certain areas, if you achieve greatness, you can be elected to be able to be part of it. And of course, we know that there's been many, many great people that have received Nobel Prizes for doing great and wonderful things. Of course, many Jewish people, I think a third of all Nobel Prizes were given to Jewish people, in which we can see an outstanding contribution which we have to society, something which we can be proud of. Now, of course, what was he worried about? He was worried about what his name was. Well, who am I? Am I the Merchant of Death, or am I a source of invention? Am I a source of life? Am I a source of good things? And this is exactly what Dr. Alfred Nobel wanted to bring about. So we look at the name of the Parsha, Chaye Sarah, the life of Sarah. Now we know that in this week's Parsha, this is essentially where Sarah is departs from this world. This is when she passes away. So essentially it's not the life of Sarah, it seems to be the complete opposite. It seems to be the passing of Sarah. Her life was lived in all of the Parshias which were earlier. And this week's Parsha passes away and it speaks about her burial. So of course we need to understand why is the Parsha called the life of Sarah when it is actually the opposite. So we'd like to explain this according to an interesting idea that I heard from Rabbi Slapetitsky. We have a very important bracha which we say when new things happen, at times of festivals, when we wear new clothing. And of course, the famous blessing, Baruch Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, and then it is Shehechiyanu v'kimanu v'giyanu lezman hazeh, that we're blessing the time that we are at the moment. And so we thank Hashem for Echianu, for giving us life, Kimanu, for giving us existence, and Vigianu, that we have arrived at this particular place. Now, a simple question when we read this blessing is, yes, of course, we are grateful for the fact that we are alive at this time, that we exist at this time, and that we've arrived at this time. But of course, the question which we need to ask is certainly our existence comes before our life. Why do we say that we've lived till here? We should say, well, that we've existed. And on top of that, an advantage which we have to exist, being in existence, is the fact that we're alive and that we have a life, and etc., etc. So, of course, we need to understand what is the difference between being alive and our existence. I'm sure that everyone that I've had the honor to meet with, they ask me, how are you going? And of course, my answer is thank God I'm alive. Because, of course, that's where it all begins. Thank God we have existence. So what is the difference between life and what is the difference between existence? I can exist. I'm here. Well, what is my existence? My existence is flesh and blood. My existence is the home that I live in, the assets which I have. Depends. Some people have more existence. Some people have less existence. Some people have more things, and some people have less things. All right, they're simply things which exist. Now, what is life? Life, of course, is what I do with all of those things. Life is the meaning or the purpose which I have behind all of these things. You know, as a child is born, so a child has their existence, and slowly, they discover their existence. They discover that they've got a foot. They discover that they've got a finger. They discover they've got a tongue. They discover that they've got ears, eyes, noses. They discover all of these things over time. They discover their existence. But what, of course, takes a little bit longer for a child to discover, that is their life. That is, what is the purpose of life? What is the idea of life? And that we develop throughout our lives, the way that we live. It's what we do with our hands, feet, and toes. It's what we do with our eyes and our ears that essentially comes and defines the life which we live. Now, we mentioned this idea last week, and that is regarding the watch. I didn't stumble across my watch on the street and look at it and say, oh, wow, look at this thing that I've suddenly discovered. I can use it for something. I can use it to tell the time. Obviously, that's not the way that we came up with the watch. It's the complete opposite. We have this thing called time, and I want to be able to not know what the time is. And so therefore, I've come and I've created a watch. So the existence of the watch is secondary to the purpose of it, to the life of it, because there's a need that I should tell the time. So therefore, I've created the existence of the watch. And so therefore, when we come and we look at all of the details which we have in life, we recognize that there's something which must come before its existence, and that must be the life of it, the purpose of it, the ideal which is behind it. You can have a car and you can have the most fanciest car. You can have this car which goes very, very fast, it has all of the gadgets, everything inside of it. But if it doesn't have fuel to be able to motivate it, to be able to move it, to be able to cause that it should combust, that it should be alive, then it's not worth anything. Well, it has a great value, but it doesn't have any purpose. It doesn't have any meaning. And this, of course, is something which we need to be able to develop regarding all of the details in our lives, our existence. We have to be able to live. And so therefore, if we ask ourselves, well, what comes first? Is it our existence that comes first? Or is it the life that we live that comes first? Well, we recognize that existence without a life is not really existence. It's being, but it's not living. Every parent knows that when you have a teenager that's growing up, so a teenager is always developing their existence. A teenager is always making sure that everyone knows that they exist. The teenager is always making sure that no one takes away their existence. They've got to make sure that they are heard. They've got to make sure that they are known. They've got to make sure that they're accepted. And if, God forbid, a parent will try to tell them how they should or how they shouldn't, we're fighting with this existence. We're coming and fighting with this, and therefore they come and they rebel. Now, essentially, what then gets the parents backs up is the fact that, well, if the kid is now going to come and tell me what to do, then that's taking away from my existence. And if it's coming and taking away from my existence, well, I've got something to say about that. I've got something to disagree with that. I've got something to challenge in that. You can't take away my existence. And this is where we get into fights. This is where we get into issues and problems. And our teenagers, they rebel and they fight against us. And all they're looking for is their existence, that they should have a say, they should have an entity, that they should have something which comes and says that they're here. Now, of course, as a parent, what do we need to do? Well, we need to think to ourselves, well, am I fighting over my existence, or am I fighting over my life? Am I fighting over my purpose and my meaning? And essentially, my child's not going to choose for me what my purpose and meaning is. I choose for me what my purpose and meaning. My purpose and meaning in this particular area is being a father. It's being a parent. It's being a guidance. It's being a teacher. It's being someone that tries to bring about meaning and purpose within their own lives. And so therefore, essentially, I shouldn't fight with the existence of my child, but rather I should help to be able to create a life for my child. I should be able to help to create a meaning for my child, that my child should be able to see that there's more to life than the details. And how is that? Well, I need to express it by being a living example of what that means to be a good life. What does that mean to have a good life? What does that mean to have a meaningful life? And so here, this is what we can understand, that the Shechianu comes before the Vikimanu, that the recognition or the acceptance of life comes before the recognition of my existence. Because the only reason why I exist is because I have a life, is because I have a purpose. When we look around in all of the details of our lives, we need to realize that all of these things exist because of the life which we want to live. It's not about getting the details, rather it's about living the life. Someone can see, well, everyone else has this car, or everyone else has this type of house, or everyone else has this type of whatever. We think to ourselves, well, we need it. I know someone thought to themselves, they saw their neighbor with the most fanciest lawnmower. They thought, wow, I've got to get that. How can my neighbor have, such a cool lawnmower? And he brings it home and he says, look, I've got this fancy lawnmower. And his wife says, yeah, but darling, we don't have any grass. You see, sometimes that example is many different things in our lives. We think to ourselves, well, I need something because I've got to prove my existence. With this, we say, no, first of all, you need to know Shechianu. First of all, that the Chaim, that the life which we have, what is that? And then once we have that life, it's then afterwards that we can explain our existence. Because the life which we live explains the details of our existence. And that's something which is a very, very important point. And therefore, our life, our meaning in life, always needs to come before that. I'll share with you a story about a gentleman by the name of David Aron. He says that when he was 13 years old, him and his brother, his twin brother, their parents decided that they're going to do a big bar mitzvah for them. And they were going to go to America on a trip. And then after that, they're going to come back to Israel, and then they're going to do a big bar mitzvah. They're going to do a big ceremony and a big function, and they've saved up lots of money for this. So when they went to America, he says, 13 years old there with his twin brother and his father, they travel, and his father had a good friend, which was a rabbi in a particular community there. And they went to visit the rabbi at his shul, and they noticed that he was a bit flustered. He was very anxious, under pressure, stressed. So the father asked him, Rabbi, what's the deal? What's the issue? So he says, listen, there's this Russian family that have just immigrated. And they've got a young boy, 10, 11 years old, that sadly they've just discovered that he's got a brain tumor. And we've got to organize a surgery for them. So we need $40,000. And so thank God they've been able to organize 10,000. I've been able to organize from the 20,000, but we're lacking another $10,000 to be able to make sure this child is able to have his surgery in another few days. We don't know what to do. So the bar mitzvah boy, the one that's telling the story, David Aaron, he said to his father, he says, Dad, you know what? We have all of this money which you've saved up for us to have our bar mitzvah in Israel in another few weeks. You know what? Maybe an idea would be is that we can have a very simple bar mitzvah at home, and the money which you've saved up, we'll give to the rabbi, and he'll be able to pass it on so that this child should be able to have surgery, that the child should be able to live. something I think much more meaningful, much more purposeful than this. And the father says, you sure? They ask the twin brother, and the brother says, of course, what, to save someone's life? Certainly that would be much more influential, something much more meaningful. And so these two 13-year-old boys, they gave up their bar mitzvah money, and they transferred it, and thank God this child was able to have the surgery. They went back to Israel, and of course the father, he said, my father was so proud of us. He said, wow, I wish when I was your age, I had that ability to be able to see someone else in need. So he says at the bar mitzvah, they had a simple function at home. They invited all of the relatives over, and they had this nice do in the backyard. And suddenly in the middle of the ceremony, suddenly in the middle of the function, this rabbi from America arrives. And there he has a certificate for them, a framed certificate. And he came to him and he says, I just wanted to give you the certificate on your bar mitzvah. And in it, of course, was a picture of both of them. It says, the kindest act this year. And he says, I've got a big charitable organization and people give lots and lots of money. But no one has ever given a gift as meaningful as yours. It's not about the amount, but the fact that two 13-year-olds were willing to give up their bar mitzvah money to save someone else's life. This is something which has moved me so much. I had to be here to be able to celebrate the bar mitzvah with you. Now, 30 years later, the same David is telling the story. He says that he's already married and thank God he's got his children, and he's now having the bar mitzvah of his child. And his child is so happy, they're dancing. Suddenly in the middle of this whole function, who does he see walk in? He sees this elderly rabbi. Now, of course, was a lot elderly. And he had a man coming along and helping him, schlepping him. And the rabbi comes in. And of course, they're all very surprised. He says, wow, you came here for my bar mitzvah. And he says, listen, after the act, the deed which you did when you had your bar mitzvah, I says, I've got to make sure that I'm here for your simchas, for your child's bar mitzvah. And I just want to tell you that this young man, which is next to me, is the young boy that you saved, the young boy that you contributed to be able to make sure that he should be able to have his operation, that should be able to live. When we see this particular story, the child is able to come and see, 1 second, there's more to my existence than its details. There's more to my bank account than the zeros. Rather, there is meaning to the details. There's life to the details. I could have had the best bar mitzvah. I could have had so many good things, so many gifts. But what is any of those details worth when I can bring life into the world? I can bring meaning into the world. I can bring purpose into this world. And David Aharon comes and he tells this story, that it was the most memorable moment in his life. His ability to come and save another child's life. It's worth more than anything. And this is where we understand an interesting thing, which the Torah comes and tells us. The Torah says, I've given you life and I've given you death. And it says, Ubacharta b'chaim, and you should choose life. What does it mean when it comes and it says that you should choose life? Well, in the lives which we live, we have the ability to come and look at it in a very superficial manner and come and look at it from its details. What have we amassed? What have we gained? And the Torah comes and tells us, no, I want you to choose life. I want you to choose meaning. I want you to choose something which is going to join all of those details together. And this essentially is the reason why this Parsha, even though it's called the life of Sarah, it's when Sarah passes away. Because many times we're able to see what is the life of someone once they've left. We can see the legacy which they've left, we can see the void which they've left. We can see the influence which they've left, to be able to come and recognize what it is and who they were. Very interesting thing in Hebrew, there are 3 terms for a cemetery. There's Beit HaKvarot, which means a place of burial. There's Beit Olamim, which means a place of eternity. And there's Beit HaChaim, which means the place of life. Now, the place of burial is very simple. That's where people are buried. The place of eternity, well, I guess that's the relationship between the mortal lives which we live here and the immortal lives which our souls exist in, and that's eternal, the place of life. So I heard a very interesting explanation many years ago, and that is that there's three types of people. There are people that exist, meaning that they've got lots of details, they have got lots of assets, they've got lots of things, and their entire life they spent on obtaining those things. And so, of course, when they pass on, all of those things get buried, and that's it, because that's all they were things, and those things disappeared. That's it, they're gone. We have people which are a little bit more meaningful. We have people that had relationships, had connections, and that's, of course, where the majority of people are, in which we love each other, we share times together, we do things together. Now, of course, when someone like that passes away, so where are they buried? They're buried in the place of eternity. Because those memories, those feelings, those experiences are going to be things which we are going to hold on to forever. They're going to be things which are going to be eternal. Whenever we recall them, they're going to inspire us. They're going to say, wow, thank God I knew that person. So special. I'm so happy that they were in my life. But then we have a third type of a people, and these are very rare people. And these are people that their entire lives were about meaning and purpose. Their entire lives were about inspiring other people. Their entire lives were about something greater than themselves. Their entire lives was like David Aaron, that he thought, well, better than me enjoying my bar mitzvah, I can bring life into the world. I can give someone else life. So essentially, when they pass on, they haven't died. It's the complete opposite. They've left a legacy which lives on. They've left lives which other people are still living. And when we think of the great people which we have in our lives, that we think to ourselves, who has inspired us to be able to live better lives? If we take, for example, whose Yortzeit was this Sikh, Rabbi Sachs, we think how many lives he changed, how many lives he inspired. We recognize that he certainly isn't buried, and he's certainly not just in the place of eternity, but rather he's in the house of the living, because we speak about him continuously and we learn from his teachings. Is something which inspires us and continues to inspire us today. And this, of course, was the idea of Sarah. Sarah was that type in which she inspired. It was that type that she inspired her son, she inspired her husband, she inspired all of those which are around her. And this is the life which she lived. Avram Avinu, after she passes, looks for a daughter-in-law, and looks for someone that's going to continue that legacy, to be able to build that home. And this is exactly what Yitzchak, when he first met Rivka, it says that he first of all, he took her into the tent and then he married her. Why shouldn't he marry before taking her to the tent? But the Midrash tells us that he took her into the tent, meaning that he brought her to the home and he wanted to see whether the same miraculous things which happened in the time of his mother were going to be those same things which are going to happen with Rivka. Meaning, did she possess that same legacy, that same ideal? Because that was something which lived on with Yitzchak. Yitzchak, what are you talking about? I'm only going to marry someone that is similar to my mother, because that legacy, that ideal in life is something which lives with me and something which inspires me. And so therefore, Yitzchak searched out someone of that same caliber. And that's the reason why we come and we say, Chaye Sarah, this is the life of Sarah, because Sarah is still alive. Sarah is still here together with us. Now this, of course, is an interesting thing. They say that once a lady comes to the rabbi and she says, Rabbi, I'm so inspired by life. I want to be able to live forever. Life is so inspiring, so meaningful. And so she asked the Rabbi, can you give me a minute in which I'll be able to live forever? He says, well, tell me you're married. She says, no. She says, well, you should get married. And she says, what, that will make that I'll want to live forever? He says, no, that will take away your will to want to be able to live forever. One of the interesting things about marriage is that marriage, on one hand, takes away from our existence. And why is that? It's because suddenly now I've got to contend with someone else. Suddenly now there's another opinion. Suddenly now I've got to share my room with another person. And so therefore it takes away my existence. But on the other hand, anyone that's in a good relationship will tell you that my life has been enhanced 100 times by it. Because that's the nature of that relationship which we have. The relationship of that marriage, the relationship of that connection, of that growth. the life of it is far greater. And so therefore I'm willing to give up my existence to be able to enjoy a life which is far more worth living. And this is where we come and we see also from another thing. When we come to the idea of charity, the idea of tzedakah, the idea of coming and taking money and giving it to the poor, giving it to the needy, giving it to a good cause. Essentially, when I'm working and I'm toiling to be able to get my money, I'm getting more details, I'm getting more zeros in the bank account. Then when I come and I take that money, because I see that someone else is lacking those details, all right, someone else doesn't have food to eat, someone else doesn't have a house to live in, someone else doesn't have a form of education. There are so many people which are lacking. So therefore I can take my details and I can give it to them so that they will have these details, they'll have these things, these entities that they'll be able to then utilize. What does the person giving the charity get from that? Well, they get life from it. They get meaning for it. They get they're not just existing, but rather they have chaim, they have life. They have something which is higher, greater, better, something which comes and brings all of these details together. And this is where we understand that the person that's giving the charity actually gains more than the person receiving it. Because the person receiving it is receiving a monetary amount, but the person giving it is receiving eternity. The person receiving it is giving something which is larger than life. And we'll finish off with this particular story. Following the Holocaust, there was a particular rabbi, Rabbi Silver, that he was part of some organization which would go and organize funds and help the people liberated from the camps. And they did a lot of good and amazing work. And Rabbi Silver tells that once he went to one of the camps and he tried to organize a prayer group, he tried to organize a minyan. He saw a gentleman and he went over and started speaking to him. Now this gentleman ended up becoming very famous Simon Weisenthal, which he was one of the biggest Nazi chasers in the world. He did great and wonderful things. But this is just as he's being released from the camps. So Rabbi Silver goes over to him and he says to him, so do you mind coming? We want to be able to have a minyan. He says, I'm never going to join a minyan. I don't want anything to do with your prayers. I don't want anything to do with your religion. Now, of course, Rabbi Silver understood someone coming from this, but he asked, inquired, tell me what's the issue? And he says, I can't stand the religion. Why? He says that whilst he was in the camp, so there was a particular Jew that in some miraculous, some unbelievable manner, he was able to attain a siddur. And of course, everyone was, wow, such mesiras nefesh, such self-sacrifice to be able to receive a siddur. That's something which is amazing. And we all admired him. Until the next morning, I woke up and I saw that he's now selling the use of the siddur. All of the people in the camp would receive a ration of bread, and everyone would have to give him a little bit of their ration, and he would let them use the siddur. I came this and I saw this, and I thought, what is this? With our religion, we're coming and we're taking people's food. This is disgusting. Don't want anything to do with it. So Rabbi Silver said to him, Sir, why is it that you only see the one person that is trying to cheat others and desecrate the holy, when you can see that you've got all of these other people that are willing to give up their bread to be able to daven? Look how amazing that is. Look at their self-sacrifice, and so many of them willing to do so much good to be able to be connected to Hashem. And this turned Simon into a completely different person. Suddenly here he was able to see not the details, but the life behind it. And this is the most important part. When we're able to look at that life, we're able to see above all of the tit for tat, for all of the things. Someone does something to us, we can get angry, we can get upset, we can respond, we can take revenge. But all of that is just dealing with the details. Instead of us living our lives, instead of us seeing the bigger picture, instead of us seeing the bigger life, the bigger purpose, the bigger meaning behind all of these things, we just can forgive and we can move on. We don't need to be held up and beholden to all of this nonsense, but rather we can live life. And when we live it, we're more content and we're more happy. Thank you all for sharing this half an hour with us. And if you'd like to take part in next week's class in person, please get in contact and we shall arrange it for you.